not waste time or take this slow. We've got miles behind us, but miles to go. So let's just break this down to the simplest truth. You and I as one will always be better than two.
We Home Catoosa is live in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everybody, to, I guess you could almost call this part 2, but to the next episode of Sweet Home Catoosa. And we're lucky enough today to have our state representative here for Catoosa County, Mitchell Horner, show up. Mitchell, thank you for taking the time to be here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Richard, for doing such a wonderful job setting up Sweet Home Catoosa. It's just an excellent opportunity for us to be able to speak to the citizens and to our constituents.
Yeah, and so that's we feel like we're going to school today, folks, because really we're getting an education here. The big topic right now, obviously, is what's going on with property tax increase, which triggered in effect with our school board what looks to be a significant raise in our property tax bill from their side. So we had school board members here just a little while ago, and that episode's going to come out, and then yours will come out simultaneously. So you'll have both. But
wonderful. You
know, you can watch them in either order you want to, but I'd recommend probably watching the school board first and then taking and watching Mitchell's episode, because he's going to take what they talked about and then he's going to give us a state perspective and a lot of things that go behind that. So, seems like we've got a lot of time, but we've got a short amount of time with the amount of material covered. So you and I were talking, to jump right into this. The first domino to fall was property values.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so I know you can speak to that here in a sec, which is great. But most folks say in the last 2 years, we've seen up here in Catoosa County on homes about a 50%, 20, and now 30% increase in property values. So your understanding that happened.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Over the last 4 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in taxes, and local officials and county and the state and the school board try to say, well, they're the ones who raise taxes. Well, we had to raise taxes this year, but not those 2 years, and they did it those 2 years. And so it's been kind of this tap dance. And from a constituent point of view, all you see is your tax bill at the end of the day going up.
Correct.
And so I'm here today to kind of explain why this tap dance occurred, why it's still occurring, and what are the fundamental problems and questions that we have as local constituents trying to deal with this problem, and local officials trying to deal with this problem. And so first we have to ask, and on the page, who's raising our taxes? So first, let's look at our millage rate. Millage rates over the 2020 to 2024 period actually decreased, shockingly enough. It went from 23.14 in 2020 to 19.99 in 2024. So then you have to ask, well, if millage rates are either staying the same or going down, what is the true problem? Well, it's the appraisals. The appraisals increased in 2021, 11%. 3% in 2022, in 2023, 19%, and 2024, 32%. So the fundamental problem that I see continuously happening in Catoosa County is our failure to understand compound growth and compound problems that keep just domino affecting us.
Right.
And this isn't a problem that just all of a sudden came out of the blue. We could have solved it. We could have talked it through with local officials, with the state, and said, okay, this is our long-term plan. But unfortunately, there's not a long-term plan currently, and that's why I really want to address this. So first, let's look at the county appraisals. Well, first we ask, why is home values going up so quickly? Well, we know, unfortunately, inflation massively increased in these years, 21, 22, and 23. And I'll get into inflation and the feds a little bit later. But what we see is that inflationary process massively affecting our appraisal values. So I've been a strong advocate to get rid of property taxes across the board. I think we can do that slowly over a long period of time. But the problem is, at the end of the day, you're trying to appraise a thing that's on the market that you are not selling.
Correct.
So it would be the equivalent of me saying, okay, I want to sell this pin, but I, as an individual, saying that this pin's worth $10, but I'm not going to put it on the market yet. Well, then, because there's a mass influx of pins, it goes down to $8, but I'm still saying, well, it's worth 10. Well, you can't sell it for 10. You can get it for 8. And the vice versa happens. If inflation goes up, and when I bought it, it was $10, where now it's $12 because all the materials it takes to build this pin goes up, that value of the pin goes up. So, but our appraisals didn't keep up with that rate. And so at the end of the day, the problem really is individuals trying to appraise something that's not on the market. And there's all sorts of steps, all sorts of different regulations, rules, and government bodies that come into play to make sure you're unbiased when you're trying to regulate this pin. But the truth is, as we'll see through the figures, that even though appraisals went up massively, we're still not at market value of that pin on average. But when you look at specific cases, you'll see dramatic increases or decreases of what you value that pin at. And so at the end of the day, that's really the question and problem when it comes to local appraisals. So what happened was, and we can see this, is at first the county and the county appraisal board didn't appraise values in 2022 properly. They only appraised at 3%. The state appraised it, and I'll go into the specifics of the appraisals in a couple of short pages. But the state appraised it at 16%, while we only appraised at 3%. So you see this first major gap occur, and so that's why we have this board here. Is how we kind of base the growth of appraisals is on either market or GDP growth with inflation growth, and then you have what actually happened. And so I had to use a couple examples. So I used a random example that I chose. I looked on just online, clicked in, what is the average home value in Catoosa County? And shockingly enough, it's $285,000. And so using Zillow's market, again, their own market valuation.
Sure.
I found a home that's at $285,000 on the market today. It's 14 Pamela Lane, and all of this is public record, so you can look at this all on QPublic. I highly recommend go looking at your own property on QPublic so that you can see what your home valued at, and you can ask those questions to the appraisal board, to your county officials, and get to the bottom of what you believe this issue is.
And when he says QPublic, real quick, so if you go on Google and you put Catoosa County property assessor, in the search that'll come down there, you'll see one with an IP address in blue down there. It'll say QPublic, Catoosa QPublic or QPublic. Click on that. When you click on that, what's going to come on the screen is you'll consent to it, but you can go up at the top, and I think it's the second one over. You can hit search, and then it'll give you three options. You can do it by the name of the person. The easiest one is to just put your address in. And if you don't know your address, just real quick, you can type an address somewhere close by. And when it pulls that up, you can go to map and click on the map and find yours. But if you just put the address in, that's the easiest thing to do. In this case, it had been 14 Pamela Lane. It'll self-populate, click on that. And then there you go. Now you get to all the information about your property.
Exactly. Yes, sir. Thank you for explaining that so thoroughly. So first, 2022 was the first major bump in the road. And so the appraisal only rose at 3%, where inflation in another page was about 10% on average. And so the county couldn't afford, if your value is only going up 3%, that means their revenue is only going up 3%, but their expenses is going up 10%. So I'm going to use a lot of percentages and a lot of variations here. But the problem is, at the end of the day, you have to have this long-term planning come into effect so that you're planning for years of downturn or upturn. And
so real quick to that, 3% is all the Board of Assessors in Catoosa County said in 2022.
To increase that tax digest.
Do we know why they only said 3%? Have you heard?
I've heard different things from the tax assessor's office, from the county office. There's been underlays of why they did this, why they did that. But at the end of the day, I don't deal in gossip. I just deal in the fact that they only did it 3%. So because of that 3% valuation, the county needed funds and sources, and they weren't willing to cut services. They were only willing to keep their revenues and their expenses the same. And so they had to raise your millage rate from 5.8% to 7.346%. So that was the first big time a tax increase happened in Catoosa County, was 2022. So then the next dance moved really to the school. The county kept taking the roll back afterwards, but they were getting enough revenue in because appraisal values were going up so dramatically.
Correct.
Because they were trying to catch up to that 3% value. Because, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, just because our local officials say it's 3%, well, the state comes in and says, here's the second book. Because we don't honestly trust local evaluations, because locals maybe don't want their property taxes to go up, so they undervalue their area.
Correct.
We're going to come in and say, this is what we believe the state averagely grew, and we're going to base your area on that in some way, shape, or form. And you have to be within a certain window to be able to be in compliance with the state books.
But real quick on that, if a local official decides he's going to only do it for 3, the sales in the market are going to reflect a whole different picture as well,
Exactly.
right?
And that's what you're
the
seeing.
sales are going to say, hey, you grew on average with the sales base there 10, 12, 20%.
Exactly.
So you can say as a county official is 3, but the actual sales of the home, which
But the
is
actual
really,
pin value went
yeah,
up.
because once you sell it, it
And that's
establishes that value.
And that's what the state based on, is that market
There
value
you go.
and the
From
average
sales.
of the market value.
That's right.
And so they only raised it 3% that year. So quickly they were having to play a catch up game because unfortunately that pin doesn't say $12. The next year on the state average, it raised 20%. Well, we only raised our appraisals the next year 19%. So we still didn't catch up from that 3%. We were still underneath their market value growth. And that's when we moved into 2024, when you saw this massive jump of 32% because they were still playing catch up from 2 years ago. And that's how compound interest is not your friend in this sense.
Sure.
That's why we say when you're retiring, save as early as you can, because the longer you do it out, the better it works. And so the county appraisal value was the first real jump in the road. So on millage rate, though, the county actually took the rollback the next 2 years. So they didn't technically raise your taxes. The appraisal board raised your value, but they took the rollback to the full amount the next 2 years. So the county only raised it 1 year, to be fair to them on that side. Then the school board jumped over, and we'll see through their financials why they did this. But the school in 2023 and in 2024 kept the same millage rate. Well, if the value of the pin massively increases, your tax amount massively increases. So at the end of the day, I can explain all these numbers, but the problem is, and the truth is, as my constituent, your property taxes went up 55% in 3 years. And that's because of a hit in accounting. Again, just reiterating, and as a result, was a one-hit millage rate increase in 2022 that they actually never fully went back down to when it comes to exact numbers. They did millage rate rise, but the values massively outpaced that millage rate value.
Right.
And then the school board keeping the same millage rate, but truly raising your taxes because your appraisals and that value of what you're getting taxed on massively increased. And so let's use an example. And I like to use averages. I see a lot of infographics go around with just a very low amount on it, but I like using the average because that's what the average citizen, average you guys out there, has to deal with. So a $285,000 house in 2020 was getting taxed at $1,850 roughly. $1,800.51. In 2024, that went to $2,871. That is an increase over those 5 years of 55%. So that is a massive jump. And you'll see this on the infographic for folks at home, but specifically, that's just if the property valuations were right on that home. If you actually look at the evaluation for the house was a lot lower than what the retail sale of it was. Even after the 32% increase of appraisal values in 2024, and you can see this in this number right here, the value of that home is only $259,000. So it's still underneath after all their appraisals. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to believe, but it's because for so long it was underneath that market value.
Correct.
And so even now, and I went through 3 months of evaluations, and I actually had an intern do a whole year. She provided me those numbers. I just didn't have time to put in my data sheets for today. But every single month, that market value was over the appraised value by almost 10, 15% at times.
So the county's not overvaluating the houses with this massive last 2 year jump.
It's just catching up.
It's catching up.
And that's the problem is, but there's like, well, my home is this. There are about 20% of homes and about 20% of other homes that are massively overvalued and massively undervalued.
And that's where the whole process for folks at home that have talked about online, you can appeal it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think, hey, I think they just got mine wrong, you can appeal that, and there's an opportunity for
and that's
that
why
to get
please
adjusted.
check it out, because we don't want to overtax you and we don't want to undertax it.
Correct.
To be fair, we want everybody's taxation to be equal. That's the point, and the beliefs of the Republican Party is equal taxation. And so going back to it, so really every year he was undertaxed. This property was undertaxed by about $500, and then even in 2024, $800. And again, it's just about averages and what they deem as the taxation rate. And so that money per home has to come out of somewhere. and that comes out of school budgets, that comes out of county budgets, and that affects your rate of expense rate. So then a lot of people was, well, the county raised it 1 year, and then the school board raised it 2 years, but the county can vote on that school board millage rate increase. So did the county raise taxes for all 3 years? And so this has been an ongoing question that honestly we don't have an answer to. I've written down what Legislative Council has provided. I asked Legislative Council, for those who don't know, it's a group of lawyers at the Capitol that kind of help us truly read the code that we write. And unfortunately, there's some problems, and even the code is unclear when it comes to can the commissioners raise taxes. And his opinion was, no, you can't generally do that because the local boards, governing boards, have that authority. But then actually, if you look into it, it moves much more towards actually you can. Because a quick go through the story. I asked my other local legislative officials, and what do you think if the commissioners can say no or yes? And they said, well, we've heard that if it's that they can only really rubber stamp it or approve it, that you can vote for it. But there are some court cases basically saying that if you don't agree with that tax increase, that you consciously can't vote for that. So therefore, it's violating some of your rights as a future commissioner to vote for that. And so you can say, no, I'm not voting for it, and really challenge the law and challenge that at that point.
And real quick, that was the question that was asked by one of the viewers, and I posed that to the school board. I said, one of the viewers out there has said, listen, it's always just been taken for granted that when the Board of Education, the school board, gets through with their budget, it goes to the county commissioners, and the commissioners rubber stamp it. It was because it's always been presented as they can't turn it down. The school board budget it can't be turned down, which now there's folks online, and that's what you're going through right now, explaining there's a gray area there, right?
There's a gray area. And the only real thing that kind of holds it to a yes is Georgia Code Section 485401. This is in can the commissioner stop the school board millage rate increase page. And it says each county board of education shall annually recommend. So that word recommend is what you're hinging that argument on.
Okay.
So that the county board of education shall recommend to the county governing authority the rate of levy, which means rate of tax. So is it so if it's a recommendation, I mean, you're a businessman, you know, I was recommended. I don't have to say yes on that.
Correct.
So that is how you can read the law. There's a lot of local legislative officials that think that's good enough. For me, I think we need to make sure it's very clear, because even annually recommend, but I think that goes down at the end of the day to every county commissioner to say, well, I don't agree with their reasoning of doing this. Because again, the situation might be different across the board. So I think it, again, goes down to every county commissioner and how he interprets each county board of education shall annually recommend to the county governing authority the rate of levy. And so take that as you will, viewers, but that's how the law is written.
Yeah. So if you watch them in the order I said, you watched a school board member say that no, he was talking a little law there himself, and he clearly said, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer too, I want to be clear, but
yeah, and he basically was saying that no, the board of commissioners basically it's a rubber stamp type process where it may not be. So,
and the ACCG and other organizations do teach that it's just a rubber stamp to honestly keep a lot of commissioners out of trouble. Right. But there is one city locally, city of Chickamauga, that actually said, no, we're not taking your millage rate, and actually gave them a new one for recommendation, and they both had to support it. So there is precedent to say no to a school board from an executive council.
Okay.
So if that helps that answer a little bit.
So there we go. So we're working right through this, which is great. So we started with what happened to make our property taxes go crazy. And you explained that. Obviously, everybody knows everything's cost more than it did 4 years ago in your example. And so I don't think we're dealing with unreasonable people. It's just the fact it went up so fast. And of course, you covered that. You know, we should have, going back, taken an increase in 22, more than 3%, which would have softened our blow to get us to where we're at. But, you know, here again, like you and like me, I don't like to deal in hearsay. But I mean, I did hear that obviously, you know, they thought there was a bubble and they just didn't want to get caught on the bad side like 08 and overvalue to have to turn around and go back the other way. But the train hadn't stopped at all.
And that's unfortunately what I'm an amateur economist at heart. And that's unfortunately what a lot of the state economists were trying to say is it's a bubble. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, the inflation rate itself, inflation is, for the viewer, is just real quick, is the value of your dollar diminishing. That means that even though this pen is really only worth $10 because of your dollar bill being just paper, it's $12 because your paper is valued less, not the pen. And so, and I'll go. So the next point is kind of on that, which is the next page is state requirements of assessments and inflation and taxes. And so the average market value for June, May, and April went up dramatically, as you can see, from 306,000, 312,000, 419,000. That's the average home, commercial building, lot that we're selling in Catoosa County. And the average assessed value was 86% of that value, $264,000. And that's on average. So in June is 86%, in May is 91%, in April is 84%. So you're still seeing this assessed value is a lot lower than the average market value. So we're still going to be playing catch up, and you're going to be seeing why real shortly. So going back real quick to inflation. So everybody says, well, is it inflation then? Because everything costs more. Well, yes and no. So I'm a big believer that the feds are lying to us on the inflation rate because, again, the higher inflation rate, the dollar bill completely relies on the feds, and the feds don't want to pretend like it's going up too high because then it messes up all their process. And truly, it's a taxation on the poor because, again, the money is less and they need every dollar they can. And so the inflation by the feds is in 2020 was 1.4, in 2021 was 7%, in 2022 was 6.5%, and then it started dipping back down in 23 and 24 down to about 3%.
Because they raised interest rates to slow the engine down, and that was what was talked about.
Yes, but if you look at underlying asset value, so we actually changed the definition of inflation in 1990. If you looked at how we measured it back in the 70s and 80s, you're actually talking about a 10, 14% increase every year. So almost double what the feds are saying. And that's how our assets grew. Our house values grew 10, 14%. Gold grew 10, 14%. Our stocks went up so dramatically because, again, the paper's worthless, but all of that still has that intrinsic underlying value.
Sure.
And so then you have to ask yourself, so I'm a big believer on what does it mean to grow government? And this question is thrown around a lot by Republicans and Democrats because as a Republican, you're wanting to shrink the government, or at least worst case scenario, keep government the same and keep the same services. And so I'm a shrink the government kind of guy, but I realize that some people near Atlanta love to keep the trains moving. I get that. So then you have to ask yourself, so what does it mean by shrinking government? And that's where this graph really comes into play, and all of these questions kind of come into more focus. So GDP grows at about 3 to 5% a year, okay, on top of inflation. So inflation, even though it's 7% a year, we grew our economy at 9%. But if you take out that inflation rate, you only have a real value increase of that 2%. And so you can either measure it towards that GDP line, or you can measure that towards the inflationary line. I merit towards the inflation line. Now I'll explain why and what I mean by that. If this value of the pen goes up from $10 to $12, you as a commissioner still need a pen to write. So I understand that if you need pens to write, that value going $12, I'm going to have to allocate it for that. But if you need a pen, but the economy growing 3% more, you don't need that extra 3% to buy an additional pen, right? Or get an additional 3% of a pen. And that's, so I look at it is this pen costs this much this year. It costs X amount next year. And you have to look at salaries that way too. Teachers and yourself, you don't want to continually get paid at the same rate because that means the value of your work is actually going down.
Correct. Right.
And so you want to see at least your wages keep up with inflation.
Correct.
And so that's why as a conservative Republican, I believe that inflation rate should be the merit of is our economy growing or declining. And I gave three captions so you can grade each of our work, the counties, the schools, and the state. So the county expenditures from 2020 to 2024 went up from 28 million to 42 million. The biggest jump was in 2022 when they raised county expenditures 32%. But inflation was only 10%. And that's across a lot of different things, across a lot of different projects and things, but their spending increased 32% that 1 year, from $36 million to $27 million, from $27 million. It's a huge jump. And so that's where you see that first big tax increase that had to come into play in 2022. They had to keep up with their expense rate of 32%. And they did, in my opinion, grow government that year. But if you look at the schools actually kept underneath that rate of inflation. And again, it's all on this one page that we'll show on the side. They kept underneath the rate of inflation until this year. So you're asking, well, if their expenses really didn't go up because of inflation, then what's the true underlying problem? And that's where you kind of have to dig it deep into the numbers and into the audit books and into the budget books of our education system. And so and real quick, so that you can judge the state in 2021 was $30 billion. This year, we passed a budget of $36 billion. The only time it was outside that inflation rate was in 2024. But it was still below the rate of change. And what I mean by the rate of change is what I consider true inflation because assets with inflation. So it's still underneath that rate of change, but it grew 11% this year. And I'll explain why. $2 billion of that was a negotiation between the conservatives and the rest of the House saying we don't want any more debt on the books. For the last 2 years, we took out debt even though we had surpluses. And we fought the good fight to say we don't want any new debt. And so they're like, fine, we'll take away your debt, but we're still keeping the funding. And so we increased the budget $2 billion more because as I'll show you, and I'll show you the process real quick of why that money's in there, but that's why we grew it that much. So we can say without a shadow of doubt, there's no new bond debt those 2 years. And I'm very proud of that achievement. I would gladly sign that deal because again, I don't want generational debt. And that's what we have on the federal level. We don't need that on the state level because that increases your taxes overall. That changes all of these funding formulas that we're getting into. So now that we're getting into the states, let's talk about the process and what kind of y'all know of what I have to deal with on a daily basis. So as a freshman, you come into and you're nobody. You're just somebody from Northwest Georgia. And the truth is, unfortunately, we haven't had much of a voice from Northwest Georgia on the state house side. There's never been, one real strong state rep that's really pushed the ball downfield or stayed in this position long enough. And that's why investment in this position is so important is all the House cares about is how long you've been there. And so the longer you're there, the more pull, the more say you have. And so, unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of pull there, but your state representative loves to push the envelope and loves to challenge leadership. And so I also know the weight of my vote. We only have a 10-vote majority in the state house, and 99% of state reps don't push their weight around. They just accept what leadership tells them to do because they're hoping for their one little bill to pass through. I don't do it that way. I believe that it's my job to represent you guys, and that means saying no to leadership, and that means saying yes at times when we need their help. And we've needed their help on a couple of bills that we've had to kind of allocate and hope for the best, and you'll see that coming up. But most specifically is throwing your weight around also means doing it respectfully and doing it behind the scenes so that you're not just jumping up on the table saying, well, it's this guy and it's not me. Because when you do that, you just turn off all the other state reps to helping you. Luckily, we have a good group of about 5 or 6 state reps that come together and kind of help and kind of push. This is kind of what we want to see. And we know our limit. My limit's very small as a freshman representative. I can only do or ask for certain things. And so kind of how they do it is at the beginning of the year, they come to you and say, all right, Mitchell, what are you looking to achieve this session? What are you trying to budget? Because the budget and law are 2 different things. How the budget process works is a completely broken process, and I would love to change it, but that comes with time, as well as all things. But how they do it is they literally plop this large binder of all full of numbers in front of your desk 1 hour before you vote. And there has only been a few representatives and senators that have ever voted against the budget in the history of Georgia, because they know if you vote against that, you're not getting anything. So my first year there, we were in negotiations saying, I don't believe in this, this, and this. And I do. I go through every single line item and I say, this is what I believe in. This is what I don't believe in. And you have to base it off what the governor is the first one that kind of presents it to you. And you have a couple of weeks to look through it. But then they completely change it up inside the House first. and just drop it on your desk an hour beforehand. So you have to be ready to be like, all right, this is what I believe in, this is what I don't believe in. And so I told them that I tried negotiating up until the last minute and said at the end of the day, I was like, I can't vote for this. I was like, you didn't give us enough pullback and I can't vote for it. And for the first time in a couple of years, a few state reps voted no on the state budget the first time it came around. And then the second time it came around, they had fixed some of the issues, not all, but that's how negotiation works. There is no perfect bill coming out of Atlanta.
Sure.
I promise you that.
Sure.
Because 180 members of us on the House side have to decide if it's right or wrong. The Democrats aren't going to vote with us, so really 91. And then it goes to the state Senate, and the state Senate actually doesn't really believe what the House believes. So we're at odds. And then the governor's like, whoa, both of you guys need to chill out. And this is where we're coming to. And it's this very delicate balance on almost every bill, on almost every budget. And so very quick, so they lay this in front of your desk 1 hour before you vote. And I promise you, 98% of that room does not read it. At most, I'll see about 10% of state reps look for their budget line item and sit back and be fine with it. And it's an unfortunality because we're spending $36 billion of your tax money.
Correct.
Now, unlike myself, I love going through this. Now I'll hold their feet to the fire on it. But this year they played a little bit more ball because we gave a little bit of hoop haul last year. And so this year they come to us and like, what do you want? What are you trying to fix? What do you want to see? So my big love and belief is the education system. My kids are in the education system. I only have a few years to fix it so that they get a proper education too. We're on it. In my opinion, we're on a clock. And education and budget is my area of specialty, and I love it. I love what we can do for the students. I love our education system in Catoosa County, and I believe we can do better. But I want to change what we have so we can preserve what I grew up in. I grew up at Ringgold Primary. It's an excellent school. It's still an excellent school. My kids go there. So I want nothing but the best for that school. But I also know that I'm one man that can fix really one problem a year is what I try to tell the superintendent. And so I go to him and the first time I go to him, I'm like, Nick, you're my general in the field. What do you need? Sure. And we disagree on some things. But at the end of the day, I'm like, what do you need? And this is what I see the problem is. And he'll tell me what he sees the problem is. And we'll kind of come together and try to fix it long term. So this year, especially as a parent, the buses were running hours late. So I'm sitting out there waiting for my kids for at least an hour. And I know other parents are doing the same thing. And I'm like, Nick, this problem. And he explains what the problem is. He helps dive into the numbers of what we need and what we're looking for. And I read the code section. And the code section is very unclear. All it says is we'll appropriate funds. It doesn't say what amount. So when we started, and this is where we're getting to unfunded mandates in a little bit, but what happens is it's a great idea on paper. Buses for school kids. Great. Well, the problem is the state either goes through recessions, they go through budget cutbacks, they go through budget increases, and they never solve the problem underneath because of how we do our budget process.
Right.
And so what happens is the bus mandate is an excellent example. We basically said we want buses for all the students. And you can take that back, but there's a lot of red tape and all sorts of things that come with it. But we provided 50-50 matching funds in 1990 with it. By last year, it was only 19%. Because of that gradual slide. All things lead to that graph. Because of the gradual slide. If you just keep funding the same rate, that money loses value, that program loses value, and it's more on the local taxpayer. And so I was like, I think this is the one problem we can solve. There's a lot of support on the education budget in the Republican Party for more funding in education. And so I go to Chairman Hatch. I was like, this is what I want. I just want 40%. I'll do a bill if we have to just say forever it's 40%. But I was like, I at least want 40%. And he's like, well, we've already talked about it. We want that too. And so we're completely for it. But know that there's other education bills coming down the pipeline. I understand. And that's how you have to give and take. And so transportation funding was the first major priority that I took. And we were able to get that in this budget. And I'll go through this entire budget in a minute with us. So that was that process so after it goes to the House for an hour, then it goes to the Senate. So then the Senate says, well, we don't like what the House did because either we want to cut your opportunity or we want to extend the opportunity. And most of the time it's cut, to be fair to them. They do take a hatchet to it. And then they come back and we're like, whoa, we don't want this. And so it's a negotiation process for months. Then the last day of session, they drop another one of these at your desk and say, here you go, vote for it. And again, you have to go through the whole process of, okay. But at the end of the day, you most likely vote for it because whatever is still in there or it's not, that's how you weigh your vote. And then it goes to the governor for appropriations. So that's how the government process kind of works. And unfortunately, you don't have a lot of say as a singular member.
Sure.
Because, and let's talk, so that's just the budget process. And the budget process I can say buses are great and I can put it in this code section. But if I don't put it in this bill, it doesn't matter and it's not getting funded. So then you have the legal process of it, which is there are a lot of bills because everybody wants better schools. Everybody wants better literacy. Everybody wants X, Y, and Z. And it sounds like great on paper. And so so we had a literacy bill come up this year, and it did cost our local school system $1 million. And we were able to renegotiate some of the things when it came to what that bill did and defined. I asked the school board and the superintendent, what do you think about the bill? They're like, it's going to cost us $1 million this year, but we already have most of these in place. So we don't want you to burn the Capitol.
Right.
Because it's just political capital down there, unfortunately. Everything you do gets weighed. An excellent story on this is when I first started, I went down there and I told them, I was like, look, I'm down here to get work done. I love this process. I love policy. Just tell me where you want me, but I'm not here to do dinners and shenanigans. And they go, you're not here to do dinners. You don't want to hang out with us? You don't want, and for the next month, I swear, all of them said, Mitchell just doesn't want to be our friend. So and until I went out to dinner with them consistently, they would not even listen to me. That is how you're dealing with a high school like environment at times. And so that's just, you have to play a lot of different balancing acts to make sure you get what you want and to make sure that process keeps going.
It does. And that's the politics of it. Recap. Property taxes caused a problem. Mitchell, you talked about how we got behind and we got caught up. And here we are. And so now, and Chance Nix came on here and he talked about it, about like an unfunded mandate, things like that, and impact our local school system. But at the end of the day, state level, and I know this is what you're going to get into because this is what people want to know, right? We're hearing from the state level that insurance went up and we can't do anything about it. And there's things at the state level, that they're doing. They take 5 mills and they take money. And so that's what I want you, and that's what you're about to do. Tell us from a state level perspective, what is right and what's kind of misconstrued out there about everything.
So first you have to look at the general fund balance, right? And just look at the money for a picture of what it is. So revenues and expenditures, revenues over expenditures, aka deficit or surplus, and our local school board funding was actually in a deficit in 2021, and this is under GF balance page, was in a deficit of $10 million. And so you have to ask yourself, where's this hole coming from? And so I went through state audits and I went through local budgets, and very quickly you kind of see the problem. Property taxes, again, stayed the same. So it didn't go up with inflation. It just stayed the same. And state funding actually, it went up and down, to be fair. In 2018, it was $73 million. It went all the way to $77 million in 2021, $83 million in 2022, dropped in, and this is voting years. This is like 2021. In 2023, it went down to $80 million. Last year's $80 million. And we actually increased in state funding $4 million to $84 million this year. And so it waxed and waned depending on, and I'll explain the reasons why.
But there's a little consistency there. We might have been down 3 million, up 3 million. Exactly. But I mean, really, if I look at this across the board, it's about 81 million for 5 years. And it really didn't fluctuate. 84, 85 is the high, 77 is the low. So really statewide, it wasn't a big swing.
Exactly. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, then let's look at the federal funds. In 2018, it was 8 million. And for about 3 years, it was consistently at 8 million or 7 million. Then in 2021, what happened in 2021? We had COVID. So a massive influx of federal money came in, 14 million in 2021, 25 million, another double in 2022.
Correct. Almost another double.
In 2023, it went down to 15 million. So you kind of see this bell curve forming.
Correct.
And then 3 million this year and 0 in this new projected budget.
So going all the way back to 2018, even before COVID and all that, the federal funds were about $8 million. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden, 2024, it's only 3 million, and this year is none.
Exactly. It's just that bell curve of just fettered out. And so, but you can see what increased. So you had property taxes staying the same, but they didn't cut services because of that one-time spending. All they did was shift that money from the loss of 15 million to the property tax column. And you can really see that in your deficit spending. So even in 2021, 2022, they were running deficits. But the actual balance funds, and this is what the money's in the pie, at the end of it stayed the same. So that means the feds were basically propping up Catoosa County School Board's school system from 21 to 23 because we were in deficit until then. Well, it's 24 really. Sorry, $8 million deficit just this last year. The only thing that shifted and why we had to go up $15 million is because last year was an $8 million deficit. This year would have been a bigger deficit, but even with this tax increase, you're still seeing a deficit of $600,000. So, I mean, you're a businessman. You know, if you're running deficits for 5 years, you have to find somewhere to find the revenue or cut services. They found the revenue in $15 million more in property funds and a loss of that federal funds. Now, don't get me wrong. The state funding did change. And so let's get into the nuts and bolts of state funding.
There we go.
So this is the next page of state funding. So we see federal rates tanking down. We see really spending staying the same. And we see state spend funding fluctuating. And this is why it fluctuates. So in the budget, it mainly originates from this little section here. And I'll get into the exact line items in a minute, but I want you to read it just so you can see. So actually, the infographic you see in front of you is from the Catoosa County School Board. It provides you a little graph and details of FTE, QBE earning, local fair share, equalization, and transportation. And we'll get into each category in a second. So a QBE is simple, but it's not simple. It's basically putting every child on a weighted structure. Do I agree with this funding formula? No, it's been in place since Jimmy Carter. All it basically does is say, if you're a gifted student, this is X amount of money. If you're a student in need, this is Y amount of money. If you're in first grade versus ninth grade, X and Y different types of money. It's all over the place on where the state kind of thinks that funding
how
needs to
much
go.
that child takes. And Chance did a great job of that, talking about a normal child, maybe $2,600 a year.
Mhm.
But if you get this child and he goes through that,
Yeah,
everybody's
exactly.
weighted differently. And the more accurate reporting you do as a school district, the better you get funding. And
Exactly.
so he said we have to put a lot of time into that.
But going back to value of our property, it's also based on 15 mills. And it's local mills. So if our local mills are undervalued, we're not getting proper funding. So I gave a report last year, and the difference between this the local funding and state funding was like 25%. So that was 25% because of our property tax digest not being in rolls of funding that we did not get from the state that was already allocated from the state that we just didn't get because our property digest did not add up. And that's just on local digest. So something I've seen now, what I do want to address is there is, and it's actually, I mean, you're finding a Democrat come November, and this is a Democratic narrative that's going around in Catoosa County that the Republican Assembly cut the education budget. We grew the education budget 8% this year, $2 billion more in extra funding that I'll go through in new funding that the Republicans in the House says we need in our education system. And I fundamentally believe in that. So we actually grew QBE and over funded it for the first time ever. We went to full funding last year, and for the first time it's at full funding this year. And what that means is that weight gets that full amount. It used to be like 80% of whatever is weighted for.
Correct.
And so how it works is you get 15 local mills. So now with our mill rate going up, we're going to get more mills than we did before because our value went up. And that 15 mills, well, you also, as a local entity, you have to kind of give a deposit. You have to give 5 mills that the state says is local funding to get that 15. So really you're getting 10 mills at the end of the day.
10, right? And that's what they were talking about board. It's like they send up this pile of money and then they turn around and say, well, we want 5 mil or we want this much back.
And it's not that it goes somewhere and disappears. It's just kind of like I'm writing you an invoice for 15 mills and taking out 5, and so I'm giving you 10.
Correct.
So at the end of the day, you're just getting 10. There's no money swishing around or going to.
And we won't get into that mill because they talked about.
Yeah.
And the reason I keep checking my phone is, we've got to keep an episode to a certain length, and we got 13 minutes, not to because I know Mitchell. We could probably talk for 4 hours.
yes.
But so we won't get into that state stuff. The local folks just want to know, why is our property tax?
Exactly.
Why is the school board not going to take an increase?
Yes.
So
equalization, real quick, did go down a little bit because of how it is designed. How it's designed, real quick, is students divided by property value. So if our property value massively increases, and it is based on the average of property value growth. Again, this graph
Correct.
is as clear as you can make it. So if it goes up dramatically, but your students stay the same, and for the last, so we're like, well, what if it's a student increase? What if the funding all just went to new students? Our students actually declined in the last 5 years from 10,300 to 9,900. So that means we're spending a lot more money versus
Cost to educate them has gone up.
the cost of education has massively gone up, and you have to ask yourself why. And then those deep numbers we just don't have because we're only given a 3-page budget as
Sure.
citizens. So I can't.
And I asked that question as well because that was a question a citizen had is, I can get 160 from the board of commission type side and I only get 3-page school board.
Yes.
But so you're saying that if property values jump 30%, that hurts us.
Exactly. And so, then that's the big problem is these equations are 30 years old. We know how many houses are going up next year, 572, that we know of, just during 2024 and 2025. That's a higher tax digest. That's a higher valuation. And if that's going up higher than the state average, which again, we know because you can just pull it from the internet, then your equalization is going to go down next year and then the year after and the year after because we're not planning growth. So at the end of the day, it's not so we're just overdeveloping so much that it's not keeping up with the rate of growth. And that's where all of these compounding growth factors come into play is everyone's like, if this didn't all just happen? Over the last 5 years, we've grown at a massive rate in Catoosa County compared to the rest of the state. So we are a richer county because of how they devised those equations. And we didn't plan for it. And I think we should have planned for it. I hope that we do in the future, knowing that this equalization is going to go down further just because that fund. And on a state level, we increased equalization 25%. And yet, with the school thing, you're going down $2 million. That's not the state. That's local value going up so fast. And so all of this local value that comes into play massively changes the amount of money you're getting. The state can increase it all they want, but because of those equations in this law book, it's driving down funding because we're growing so fast.
Development is hurting us.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. In a nutshell, you're saying that Catoosa County is overdeveloping. We're building so much that it's actually from a state level and how they fund our Board of Education.
Yes.
It's hurting us as far as the amount of money we would have got. So real quick on that for the average citizen, where I look back at it and it was like 62% over those 5 years. If we'd averaged out instead of 20 last year or 1932 this year, but just 20 and 30 for that 50%, roughly 51 in the last 2 years. If we'd have jumped back a year before and we just said 17%,
exactly,
or it'd been 18 counting that year, 18% 3 years, we would have got more funding from the state. This year at 18% growth from the Board of Assessors versus them saying 30 to catch up.
Exactly, because the mills would have been higher, the equalization might have been lower, but you're equalizing everything out. That's how these equations are made and built. It's all intertwined. That's why it's hard to reform it. It's all of this is intertwined.
We got less money from the state because we had
we got more fund. But in that one category, more
if we'd have been only 18%.
Exactly.
From the Board of Assessors instead of 30, the state would have given us more money than what they already gave, which was more, but would have gave more to the more.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's the fundamentals is we're just not planning. We're not saying this is what's truly affecting us. And a real question is, well, if all of these houses are being built, well, it's going to affect the student growth because of all these people moving in. And something that kept bothering me with a conversation I had with the superintendent a couple of days ago, and I'll be quick, is the amount of students are decreasing. So it's not. So you have to ask yourself, why is students decreasing, but we have more people than ever before? And it's because young adults, people my age, can't afford the $285,000 houses that are going up. And so in a way, we're pushing out students. So we're solving one problem terribly. And we're not giving real affordable housing at all because it's all rich homes. And it's just this overdevelopment type of process that's really pushing out a certain type of people.
Well, we see a lot of 55 and over developments go through the Board of Commissioners. I mean, you see that.
Absolutely.
You have 55 and over, which typically that doesn't mean students, but it does mean growth for the county.
Yes. And so that's what I'm saying. So it one hand affects the other, and it's a balancing act. So we increased, so going through their difference, right? So their QBE earnings went up $4.5 million, which is relative to the state. Their local fair share went up too because that it's just based on that mill rate. So if your mill rate of the 5 mills goes up at 30%, it's going to go up 30%, which is what it looks like here. But you're also getting 30% more from the overall formula, because it's not a give or take. It's 15 mills.
But it's almost net same. And we went up 4, but we had to pay 2 more in. So we're still at the 2 million.
2.5 over.
2.5.
Equalization, we went down because of, again, the development. Transportation, we went up. So that was a major thing that we went up from 20% of funding to 40% funding, $1.5 million for every year. Now, for that, we had to pass a mandatory, the Literacy Act came into effect. And so we did lose $1 million this year because of that bill. So it's a net, again,
almost a net, about $300,000-400,000 to the gain.
But after every year.
Transportation and that unfunded mandate, as they would call it.
But then next year it goes to $1.5 million forever. Nurses, that's just a local thing that they do here. I do believe that the state should have some input, and that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day, since I'm being
that hadn't grown. $4,000. I mean, that's not a big jump.
So overall, the net total earnings was $4.7 million for the county from the state. So it's not really state funding. So state funding didn't go down and went up roughly 5%. So then they say increase in state funding eclipsed by 2 state mandatory factors. And this is where I really have a question. 1, 2,500 certified employee raises. In this budget, line item 24.18.3. 24.18.3. And I'll let you read it for the viewers. 24.18.3. And it's the next one as well.
So it says increase funds to adjust the state-based salary schedule to increase salaries for certified teachers and certified employees by $2,500 effective September 1st, 2024. And then it says increase formula funds to reflect an increase in health insurance, employer contribution per member per month, rate for certified school employees to $1,760 effective July 1st, 2024. So what the school board said on here, and I'll let you talk to that real quick too, is they said they did that, they mandated that in, but we also had people that didn't fit into that bucket, but we needed to take care of them too, because we didn't feel like, we needed to be fair.
And that's the local.
That had to come to the local side.
And that's because the state says this is who we think it takes to run a school system. A certified individual.
So you're saying the state funded, let's just take it for easy math.
62.5% of the employees of Catoosa County.
There we go. So the state's saying those other 37.5%, we don't think you need those people to run your school system.
Exactly. And so then it falls on locals, and it's a whole nother issue. And I'm not getting into because I don't know.
Trust me, I'm the same way. I'm saying, if you had 1,000 employees for quick math, that's like you're saying 375 of them.
Yes.
We don't need them to run the schools. And I can guarantee you a chance that we're saying, exactly. I can tell you right now we do. But
and I'm not getting into that formula. That's a whole nother.
Figures out that formula at the state. Yes. I'm sure that Chance and them would love to talk with them. But yeah, but that is a reality.
And so the state funded our share of employees.
But it was left to the local taxpayer to fund the balance.
Exactly. And so that's just, again, how those equations work out.
Yeah.
So we funded it from our angle. It's just, again, because of all the local decisions that come into play, it affects your bottom dollar.
So let me ask you real quick on that, because I know I'm not going to burn your time up here. Is that something you see statewide, though, where it's about that way, where you see school systems have about 30% more than what the state says they should have? I mean,
how we do the funding real quick is very old school. I don't agree with it. I don't want to get into this administration positions needed.
No, sure.
But I think, and that's really what I want to say at the end of it, all this, we need to fundamentally rethink our education system because of who it affects. It affects that child and that child's need of education. And in a 21st century, I think there are things that we need to change up to be able to do that. And the system as a whole is very hard to untangle because of everything we're defining now. And so, yes, on average, you're seeing an administration over
what the state says they
required.
Should, because they're saying, hey, we're here every day, and we say, no, we've got to have that.
Exactly.
All right. So we definitely got to talk about the insurance.
Yes.
That's the big,
and
big,
you can see, and let me be clear, this is, okay, these fundings that we're putting in there is only yearly. So the health insurance is a whole nother issue. So in 2022, when I took office, we're sitting there in our first budget talks as freshmen, and they go, oh, by the way, the state health insurance program is going bankrupt. And I'm sitting there like, and everybody else is just like half asleep. I'm like, wait, what?
Sure.
And they're like, but don't worry, we have a plan. I'm like, I don't trust this. And so I looked into it a little bit, and we're trying, because there's a whole lot of other issues that were popping out of the woodwork because of COVID and all X, Y, and Z. But yes, so on the health insurance front, it was going bankrupt in 2022. For the last 10 years, they hadn't properly adjusted it. Again, going back to this
Kind of like what we had with our property values.
Exactly.
They weren't really doing it the way it needed.
And so what did they have to do? They had to immediately jump it up. And the State House said, whoa, let's do it over a 5-year period. Well, then we took it over to the Senate, and the Senate's like, we just want to do it this year.
So that's the two factors real quick. We had a lag in assessing, jumped up real quick. And then at the same time, coincidentally, the state had insurance problems, so to speak, right? Going bankrupt. And they ramped theirs up really quick. And when the two coincided, here we are with a huge property tax increase.
And with the federal funds massively
And the federal front, well, they went to zero.
Exactly. They completely died
They're
out.
gone out in this
But they were
next year.
one-time funds, to be fair. So it's all this shell game that you have to kind of dig down into to make sure that we're addressing these problems. And that's where it comes with communication and with openness of dialogue. And so
we're 2 minutes, and I know that's crazy, Mitchell.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'll be really quick. What are the fundamental problems? The fundamental problems are state and federal, unfunded mandates, excessive regulations, and poor outdated equations. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's not the state. I'm saying we're trying to fix it, but it takes time.
But you're probably going to have more success real quick on that because everybody statewide having these same issues you're talking about. And so when you go back this year, there's probably going to be a lot of talk about things.
The problem is they can't come up with a better equation.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of issues, and a lot of school boards don't want to change it. It's a whole big political debacle.
Catoosa County, I get you.
And I mean, exactly. And so local school systems, they're unfortunately, a lot of them are cumbersome. They're slow to evolve for efficient spending and resources, as we see with the loss of federal funds. We're not really, and comprehensive reform that we all need to really sit down and talk about what we want and see and need is very slow to really get into that system. Local government systems, again, we just have poor planning, poor management, and poor communication, as you've seen. And that needs to be addressed long term. And then on the last, I call it four-leg stool. The last thing is parents. Parents also do need more involvement, and we need to shift the focus because there's so much focus on, we just kind of dropped a lot of responsibility onto the school system. And parents need to be able to say, okay, no, let's take some of that back. Like nursing is an excellent example. I wish I could get into that further, but it's take your kids to the doctor instead of taking them to school nurse. And that's why there's so many school nurses, because you have to have this responsibility balanced out. And so what are our solutions, especially as being future commissioner and a state representative? Better communication. I see this all the time. We talk about it so much, but it's costing us on our bottom dollar. At the end of the day, all of this is costing us. We need better community planning. We have lost massive amounts of funding due to lack of, to the quick growth of our property values, and we're not planning it out. We know these issues. We know these fundings, but no one sat down and said, okay, maybe we should either dial this back or upgrade this and say, can you fight for this? Because I have to fight for one issue a year, as we've seen.
Correct.
I can't solve all this overnight. And 10 years from now, maybe I can because I'll have enough influence. But it takes a lot of time to build that up. We do need more local control. There's so much curriculum, choice of administration, and success, and all sorts of success rates that we just need to shift back to the locals. I'm all for, we have a great school system. We are hitting a lot of good marks. We're hitting some marks that are questionable that we need to look into and say, is this something we want to address? And I'm all for saying, let the locals handle it, because we have done a lot to get parent involvement in and parental choice in school vouchers. We passed the school voucher bill that only affects the bottom tier 25% of schools. It doesn't affect Catoosa County at all. Correct. $1 does not come to Catoosa County in school vouchers. So that means that we have a very good school system that needs that local control. We need a revenue reform. All of this can be solved if we didn't have property taxes. And a good shift away, in my opinion, would be sales tax. I have a whole nother sheet, and you know this, a whole nother, whole nother lesson on
but it still wouldn't eliminate the school portion.
It would not, but that's where you have to say, well, if we want to move towards this, I believe that we could get away with a 4% overall sales tax in Catoosa County, 2% schools, 2% county, and not have any property taxes. But Don't quote me on that. It takes a long time to do that.
That's just spitballing. I get it.
And then mandatory, and then I have some bill ideas that I fundamentally will drop and plan on dropping. I do believe fundamentally that going back real quick to the healthcare problem, we don't allow the local school system to choose their healthcare.
Correct.
The state health benefit program I'm on the state health benefit program. It's a great program. I'm paying it because I know for the fact it's better than me not having, me going somewhere else. So there are a lot of services, I can say this being on it, that we could cut back. But again, teachers don't want to lose their healthcare funding. So we pass all that buck onto this local school system, or a portion of it. And a lot of portion goes to the state. So there's a lot of, again, balancing acts.
Right.
And so you have to ask yourself, well, what can we do? And I think there's a lot of reforms that we can take, that we can do, but it requires having those conversations. And I think it's going to take, and I want to stress this. I don't want to be, I see our system moving towards a lot of problems, and we have to get out of this bell curve of just, we have to have a plan. There's no real strong fundamental plan. And that's because of sunshine laws. It's because of all these other things that kind of come into play, but we need a plan, and we need to sit down. We need to address that plan, and we all need to come together and work because we all live in Catoosa County. We all want the best for Catoosa County. I know, Richard, you want the best for Catoosa County. I think you can see my passion in my work. And at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's about the constituents, about the viewer on the other end of the camera.
It is right now. And that's it. Communication has come up a lot here with budget talks in a lot of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
That it needs improvement.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Mitchell, folks, I keep doing my phone because I'm checking. Listen, we went over an hour. We were about 5 minutes over, but I thought it was crucial for you to wrap this up, to talk about what's going on, what's important to you, what you're working on the state level.
Oh, I know. That's a whole nother conversation. Yes.
Yeah, down there. Next session starts when?
January.
Yeah.
So we'll have to do this maybe November.
I'd like to have you on again to talk about what you're looking at next year as well. So everybody in the county knows what you're fighting for us for, because I know you're down there fighting for us, year round, even when you're not in session. So thank you for coming. Thank you for all this information. I know you've just scratched the surface on what you brought, but it's important for folks to understand state versus local.
Absolutely.
And what's going on. And I think everybody out of this episode, what I got, that domino that hit from the assessing of the values of our land and property here really is what set this off. And then you had those two convergence of the state insurance needing and the property values hitting at once. And that's what's just caused this bind that there's really no easy way out. And
that's the unfortunate. That's why I ran. That's why this problem was coming and we didn't plan for it and we didn't prepare for it. And it's going to keep hurting us until we address these fundamental problems. And I hate that. I want to fix it. It's just, It takes time.
Well, thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
We look forward to trying to fix it. Thank you, Catoosa. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry for the length of the episode, a little longer, but I think it's all great information. And we'll have Mitchell back to talk to us again here soon. So thank you. Have a great week.
Always be better than to